others. Your idea of the deployment of agency staff, it will of course pour yet more petrol on the petrol on the fire of dispute. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Maybe it will, but we've got to work out whether the dispute is about sort of genuine need or it's just another attempt to kind of, hold the Tory government to ransom, by hard left unions. I mean, look, the 70%, the railway workers earn 70% more than the national average, £13,000 more than nurses. Nick Lynch was talking about, the deployment of wealth. He's on a package of £124,000 plus benefits.
Right.
We've got to be in a situation now where we cannot have the country held to ransom, arm locked, by hard left unions who may have a completely different agenda to what we really suspect going on here.
Your point about nurses is well made, but you'd be the first to agree, Angela. This is not a race to the bottom, is it? So if we pay nurses virtually nothing, we should pay train drivers virtually nothing. Is that really a cogent argument?
I think it's a decent argument because, yes, it may well be a separate conversation. Of course, nurses need to be rewarded more for what they do, without question. But I think when they're using the distribution of wealth and income as the fulcrum of their argument, then we have to look at it as a kind of moral relativism and look at it in terms of how other equally, if not more worthy workers are paid.
Lastly, Angela, have they got the public on their side on this one, the unions, do you think?
I don't think they have. I mean, work, holidays, kids going to school. My daughter's got an A-level this morning.
Right.
There will be people who I know Grant Shapps can't change the law in time for this bunch of strikes. But the fact is that there are people who's after the pandemic, whose lives have been so disrupted. Finally, we've been gifted our liberty back after all these restrictions, and suddenly we have hard left unions who are so tone deaf to the needs of what the public want. I don't think they have.
Thanks for hanging on the line. I hope I've not disrupted your morning by coming to you a little bit later than was originally planned. Angela Epstein, journalist and broadcaster. Check her out in titles such as the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph. Amajit is in Gillingham. What can you tell me on this, Amajit? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. I'm a HGV driver, agency. I just feel that normally you carry out assessments and inductions as a permanent employee, so safety-wise there would be no issue.
But I don't know, while I know you have agency HGVs, do you have agency train drivers? I honestly don't know, Amajit. Do they exist?
That's the problem, I suppose, isn't it? If they don't use that model...
They do.
If they don't use that model, then it's going to be an issue. But if they do, then they can do it.
I mean, this is what supporters of trades unions would say. This is the benefit, because I believe it's effectively a closed shop. You don't get to drive a train unless you're a member of the RMT, or maybe ASLEF, I think is the other union, and therefore you have to have had the train. So they can never... Do you know what I mean? HGV drivers, they could pick off.
There's no flexibility for us then, is there?
No. Well, I don't know where they think they're going to... But I mean, one of the newspapers says that this morning, the Times newspaper covering this says, where are the agency staff actually going to come from?
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Unless they start recruiting for the future.
Have you got support? Have you got sympathy for them?
Who for?
The railway workers.
Not really.
Tell me why.
Because they get paid good money. Everybody wants a pay rise. Everybody, doesn't matter what your job title is.
Everybody needs a pay rise.
Everybody needs it. Everybody last year was on about lorry drivers. But anyway, I don't got no sympathy. They're on good money for what they do. And after COVID, little businesses are struggling. They need the footfall.
Amajit, it's fair points you make. Safe driving with your job on HGVs. Thank you. Norma in Guildford. Norma. Guildford's normally a busy railway station. That's going to be quiet next week, isn't it? Good morning.
Well, it's relatively quiet now. What I'm saying is that these train drivers, the people they're really going to affect are more blue-collar workers.
Yep.
Because majority of white-collar workers are actually working from home, which I know is a hobby horse of yours. And I just think they're going to affect their fellow workers more than the people they're really trying to affect, like office workers and all the rest of it. So I just think they're alienating their fellow workers.
Any sympathy at all for them when they talk about thousands of jobs being possibly lost and no pay rise for 3 years, Norma?
Well, kind of. I don't know, maybe half and half, but I see trains going on the line to London after they're empty. So where are they going to get the money to carry on running the railways?
Thank you for that, Norma. We'll come back to this conversation, but let's pick up on other stories. And out of the big show today, no Prince Andrew at the Order of the Garter, and possibly it is now being reported that he's seeking some kind of return to public life. Well, that's the front page of The Sun. You may recall when we went through the papers in the first hour, it's a front page exclusive. It's written by Matt Wilkinson, who's the royal correspondent. He has the splash today, and he's here with more details. Just first a word, no Andrew at the Garter. I suppose no real surprise with that, though, Matt, eh? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, it is a bit of a surprise because up until yesterday, he was expected to attend. He wanted to attend, and we were being told that he was going to be there in the public aspects, the ceremonial aspects, where he walks down the procession and all the roads, but. As you point out there, he's been having talks, and he's trying to engineer a comeback, which 5 months after his titles were stripped, he's been speaking to the family, and he wants to find a way back. And so what's happened this weekend is he was all set to go, and Charles and William, after seeing and hearing all this, have kind of thought, well, we need to put a bit of a stop to this. Maybe we're going a bit too far. We don't want Andrew at this public ceremony where there will be members of the public seeing him walking down from Windsor Castle down to St George's. So they've stepped in, told the Queen, and the Queen's made the decision. But it is sad. I was just thinking it's a week on since the Platinum Jubilee, the celebrations, and we're already back to the Andrew problem.
Interesting line in your piece in The Sun today, Matt. You write, Charles and William were understood to have agreed their approach yesterday before telling the Queen, who made the final decision. So are we now having a sort of sharing of these responsibilities? Because I'm reminded when the Queen attended the service for the life of Prince Philip, Andrew was allowed to be deployed then.
Yeah, well, look, they're a bit of a team, but if you remember earlier in January, I think Charles and William had the same concerns about Andrew, which then led to conversations with the Queen, who agreed with them that they should strip these certain titles. And it's happened again. I mean, she's 96 years old. She's doing a lot, but I think has been William and Charles that have had these discussions and raised these concerns with each other, and then gone to the Queen, who's ultimately the person who has to make these decisions.
Tomorrow, is it 5 days? Certainly 4 days. I think it's 5 days of Royal Ascot commences. Matt, are we likely to see him out there?
Well, again, until last night, he was set to go. He's had these discussions with the family where he wants to find a way back. He's talking about getting back the colonelcy of the Grenadier Guards. I don't know if they want to take him back, but he's talking about getting lots of his roles back. And he'd earmarked this week as kind of like a chance to get back into the public eye. He was going to be at this event today, and he was going to be at Royal Ascot. I was told at least once, maybe twice, he could appear on the carriage, the royal carriage. Have you seen the royal procession that comes down?
Yes.
Which would be very difficult, I think, with tens of thousands of revellers. It'd be interesting to see what the reaction would be if Prince Andrew was to attend there as a royal in front of vast crowds at Royal Ascot.
Matt, lastly, do we have any sense about how the man is himself? Is he angry? Is he bitter? Is he convinced he will one day be back, supposedly, on the balcony? What's his state of mind?
Yeah, he wants to come back. I mean, you've got to think, what does Andrew do? He hasn't got any jobs, he hasn't got any roles.
No.
But I was told he's quite confident that he could get his positions back. Obviously, he's very close to the Queen. He does have a bit of influence with the Queen, but he's very confident that he could find a role back because that's the personality that he is.
Read all about it in The Sun today. Matt Wilkinson is the royal correspondent. He has the front page and then 2 pages inside giving you more detail on that story. I don't think you necessarily want to see Prince Andrew on that balcony yet, do you? Or at the Order of the Garter, sorry? I would have thought not. Let's talk about strikes. Are you ready for those? Eli's in Edmonton. Well, what's the story, Eli? Good morning.
Good morning to you, Nick.
Yes.
I totally agree with the strike on the basis of saving their pensions and their jobs. Mm-hmm. And they were in the position to be able to do that because this is why nurses are so underpaid because they haven't got the power like these railway workers.
Yeah, I mean, it's you look at what, and I say again, it's not a race to the bottom, but you look at what other people make at this time, and you know that the economy is desperately, desperately finely balanced. Something like a rail strike obviously hits GDP. It's how responsible they're being to the economy as well that you have to assess, Eli.
Yes, listen, we live now in this society of greed, and they're just fighting for what they want and they need. And they have the power to do it, so therefore they should do it. I'd like to see a lot more, industries do the same.
Why?
Nurses.
Because
the cost of living is terrible. The only way that you can increase your salary is to do this.
Yeah.
That's why the government wants to throw this thing about casual workers and everything else. Go out there and sort it out.
Grateful for your input. A lot of support from Eli. We'll take more of your calls on that. Also coming up after the news, we're going to be coming back to that Rwanda deportation flight, whether it will go ahead, and indeed if it does, how many people might be on the plane. Hearing from Boris Johnson as well later in the show exclusively. 8:30, Breakfast with me, Nick Ferrari, on LBC The News, Simon Conway.
The UK economy contracted for the second month in a row in April. GDP fell by 0.3%. Experts had been expecting a rise. All three main sectors, services, manufacturing and construction, saw declines. The controversial policy of sending some asylum seekers to Rwanda will face two challenges in the courts later. One of them is an appeal to Friday's High Court ruling that the first flight can go ahead tomorrow. Legislation to unilaterally amend the Northern Ireland Protocol will be introduced in Parliament later. The government's insisted the bill won't break international law, despite it giving ministers the power to change parts of the Brexit treaty agreed with the EU. LBC weather, some rain in northwestern areas, but mainly dry elsewhere. Fine with sunny spells for England and Wales, warm in the southeast, a high of 20 degrees.
This is LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
More on strike action with calls in just a moment. 8:34 is the time, but let's pick up on the markets, how they closed and what's looking ahead, of course, through this week. David Buick, markets commentator from Accuracy Exchange. I'd say in the studio, good to see you. You're looking uncommonly well. I understand you had a good day at the cricket yesterday, so pleased to hear that, although not up at Trent Bridge, a more local game. You can tell us about the global equity markets, particularly the end of last week, David. Morning to you.
Morning to you, Nick. sackcloth and ashes. I can't really say very much. It's just awful. Friday was a particularly bad day. The Dow lost 4.96%, the S&P 5.6%, and the Nasdaq 7%, all in one day.
Ouch.
So here we have inflation really, really biting. The supply chain still stuck, with nobody really knowing what to do. We've got very important meetings next week. Wednesday, we've got the Federal Reserve Bank. Many people think that they might even put rates up by 0.75%, which is basically in current times pretty much unprecedented. Then we've got the MPC, our lot, meeting on Thursday, and I'd be very surprised if rates don't go up 0.5%. But there is this conundrum, is that why do you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when we're seeing people having less disposable income, which means they're not spending money at the shops, they're not going on holiday to the degree that they might be. That is a serious problem because it really affects GDP. And GDP means growth. At the moment, we've got the lowest unemployment rate we've had for years at 3.7%. And that is going to go up without any doubt at all because there isn't the work out there that we thought there might be in terms of retail and many other areas as well. And this is a major, major problem. And the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve actually, Nick, have got a real problem in what they do and how far they take these interest rates up. I don't think we've seen the peak of inflation. I'd be very surprised if we don't see 10%, both in the UK and the United States by perhaps the end of September. You hope that perhaps they may find a way of alleviating it, but the fact is that people are really suffering very badly, and it doesn't look at all good.
And just to explain the correlation, we have train drivers and other train staff actually desperately seeking pay rises, perhaps of 8 point whatever percent. That then feeds into inflation as well. It's a vicious spiral, isn't it? On and on it goes.
Well, absolutely. The other thing I think is worth noting, and there are a lot of people crying out for this, was that if you recall with the banking crisis, and also with, obviously, COVID, we had the question of quantitative easing. And the Bank of England got up to about £845 billion, which they'd thrown at the market to alleviate all the pain. Well, when that started to ease up, we didn't know anything about Ukraine. Life looked pretty good. They were talking about 7% growth for the 2022. Many people believe that both of them, the United States is not quite so good. It should have eased up on quantitative easing because it is inflationary, it is proving so, rather than thinking now, gosh, we've got to do something about this, we've got to put rates up, and it's too late. And that, I think, is the real conundrum.
OK, big week ahead, some dates to look forward to. Run us through them if you would,
David.
Well,
we've got, as I say, there's an absolute slew of them in terms of economic data, but in terms of earnings, it's quite quiet. We have to wait till the beginning of July until all the big companies, both in the UK, the United States and Europe, start presenting their second quarter results. Today we had BP, Marsh and Sirius. They're not big companies, but later in the week we've got Bellway and Crest Nicholson from the building sector, Air World from retail on Wednesday together with WH Smith and Whitbread, and on Friday we've got Biffa, which was subject of course to a big takeover battle. It saw its shares jump by about 50%, Boohoo, and then the big one on Friday, and I think this is important, Tesco. As regards the economic data, I could read it's like an encyclopedia, but the big things to look out for, we got UK GDP today, which we know was terribly, terribly disappointing, minus 0.3 on a month-by basis. Just breaking it down, the GDP for the year, we're down from 3.9% at the last estimate to 3.4% for this year. As we know, the OECD has said you're going to be at zero in 2023 because of Brexit and various other things. But just breaking the GDP down, Nick, services, minus 0.3%. You expect more from that from our major part of our economy. Industrial production down 0.6%, construction minus 0.4%, and manufacturing down 1%. It's not a great story.
Should we talk again tomorrow?
Look forward to it.
Thanks. David Burke is markets commentator at Aquis Exchange. The time is 8:39. Let's pick up on some of the emails, texts and tweets that are coming in on strike action. Paul in Maidstone says, I enjoyed your interview with Mick Lynch. I thought it was measured. He provided clear and detailed responses to your questioning. It helped me appreciate the position of the unions. Meanwhile, Martin in Wolverhampton simply says, privatise the lot. This is what happens when public funds are used. Make them all self-employed. Let's see how many days they take off then. Neil's in the Garrow Valley in Wales. What are you going to tell me, Neil? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Nice to speak to you. First-time caller.
Good to have you on, sir. Thank you.
Nick, I'm a little bit disappointed listening to some people's reaction to the strike. Of course, the Daily Mail journalist, she just wanted to tell you what train drivers were on. She wasn't very forthcoming with her massive wages. And it seems to me she wanted to pick and choose who would be allowed to go on strike simply to do with the value of their wage. Just remember why people do go on strike. Sometimes when you're a small person on your own, you feel insignificant, and without the backing of fellow workers, then that's the only way sometimes you can get your point across. And I just hope these people commenting on the trade unions never ever find themselves in a situation where their job's at threat and they got nowhere to go, nowhere to turn to, because this government has put such strong trade union rules in that there literally isn't anybody for them to turn to. And we're going down the slope, Nick. We're going back to honestly, the Victorian times.
Well, you say those tough rules have been that. They can't be that tough because we are on the verge of some fairly devastating rail strikes, you know, Neil.
Nick, you have to have a majority of, and it should show, ballot so people can take strike action. And when you said about the timing with Mick Lynch, one thing he didn't tell you, once you've actually got that ballot, Nick, it only stays alive for a short amount of time where you have to act, and you cannot reballot the members on the same strike action reasons a second time. So they've only got a limited amount of time. This was brought in, I think this was actually brought in by Thatcher, that rule. So what I'm saying is, Nick, people out there, don't, if you wish for something, it might come true. And I know unions are not always right, Nick. I'm not standing here and protecting unions, but we must make sure that we don't look at the air now. What's happening with the air industry?
But hold on. Lastly, you might be aware that the general take, the amount of money being brought in by the railway industry, is down north of 20%. If a business is losing that amount of money, it's not rare that they then decide that staff have to be let go or there can't be a pay rise.
Okay, Nick, let's talk about them. They made £500,000 profit last year. Did any of the CEOs, any of the top directors not take their bonuses or their wages? No, they didn't. They took them all. So you're still talking about a company that's making a lot of money. And what you do, you hit the people at the bottom. It's always a policy. Hit the people at the bottom first. Never touch the people at the top. And now you've got somebody fighting back. We don't seem to like it. And the thing that's really galling me, it seems to be other sort of workers are phoning in and complaining about it. And I think we're going to get a divide, Nick, soon between people who are in unions and people who are not. And the other thing is the jealousy thing about the wages as well, Nick. I lost my job 2.5 years ago in Ford Motor Company in Bridgend, and we were very, very well paid, Nick, very well paid. And the jealousy of people that were saying to me, you'll never get a job like that again. And I said, yes. I said, of course I won't. I said, but nobody coming through in my area will ever get a job like that again because the wages have been so suppressed. And Nick, we're honestly going so far backwards, mate. And this is why I believe the country's in the state it is, because we should be aiming high. We should be saying, let's get everybody up to the train drivers. Let's get the nurses on a good wage. They bloody deserve it, Nick. But instead of that, we seem to be wanting to take money off people at the top.
I hear what you said. Well, at the top, as in train drivers, of course. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if nurses were rewarded in the same level? Neil, thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to speaking to you again. Coming to you, James, in a moment. Annie said we had train strikes when I travelled to school in the 70s. It didn't affect my education. I got up earlier and I went to school by bus instead. Eugene in Worcester says, agency staff, that's a pipe dream. It costs £80,000 plus to train a train driver. Do you think the government will spend that money on agency staff so they then sit idle and wait for a strike to replace a, quotes, usual driver? James in Birmingham, your level of support to the strike. Good morning.
Morning, Nick. I fully support the unions in what they're doing, and I believe that instead of people criticising the rail workers, and it's not just train drivers, in fact, the majority of the people striking aren't train drivers, since most train drivers are with the ASLEF union. But I support them fully, and I think that everybody else should, instead of complaining, go and join a union yourself, because the only way we're going to defeat this conservative-led coalition against the working man is by joining unions. The idea that the red wall of the working class is being supported by this conservative government is laughable. We tell you, not we, but people tell them every single time, listen to Nick Abbott, listen to James O'Brien, these people are telling you every single day that you're not being supported.
Okay. Can I just put to you the fact, of course, this is a business that is losing money, the railways. It's not making the money that it did. It's not rare when businesses don't make as much that they let people go.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that. Like I said, I'm not really talking about this.
You are, because the union, obviously, and I know that's what the unions are put on earth to do. I fully understand that. They're there to fight for every last job for their members, as they should, and, of course, to get as decent a pay settlement as they can. But in reality, other private businesses would not be able to operate in this fashion.
I'm more talking generally about the point that people are calling up complaining You had a HGV driver early on wanging on about how he doesn't support them and why doesn't he join a union? Why doesn't he join a union so his wages can increase? I'm more talking generally about
but you'll never stop the agency now in that field, will you? In the
HGV field.
Yeah, there'll always be agency drivers.
Yeah, that's because their drivers didn't unionise early enough. It's a crying shame. But there's always a chance and there's always hope. All it takes is a few people to organise and try and do something. But yeah, I do understand the capitalists have got their grip on that industry already.
James, thank you. Bill's in Chessington. Bill, you're on the radio. What can you tell me? Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Nick. I've been listening to your programme again. It's all interesting stuff again.
Thank you very much. Doing what we can.
But anyway, talking about the railway, to be honest with you, I don't think they can get 40,000 people to cover these jobs.
No, of course
because
it's
too intricate.
Yeah.
But the other side of the coin is this: a lot of people think it's just one little section of the train. If you ever go to a station like Victoria at a rush hour, they stop people coming out. They do it in waves.
They stop people going onto the tube platforms. I know that much. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. That sort of thing. They control the crowd. That's not done by anyone. These people know their job. And so basically, I would never get on a train now if it had casual workers on it. Because safety, like the union man said to you, is fundamental. I mean, it's the most important thing. You want to know you're going to get there.
Right.
Not, something's going to go wrong. No. And as I say, these people, there's too many strands in the actual industry which all depend on each other. And only one of them's got to go wrong, and it all hits the fan.
But I know one is suggesting, Grant Shapps isn't suggesting you'd have untrained staff put on the railways.
Well, okay. Well, I hope he's right.
But if that is the way, surely if that is the way to make sure people can get to work, they can go to the Commonwealth Games, school pupils can take their exams, by putting trained agency staff in, that has to make sense, doesn't it?
Providing they are.
Okay, so I don't think anyone would sign off on the idea of just taking people off the street. And hey, have you ever driven a high-speed train before? Why don't you have a crack at it? John's in Bearwood in Dorset. What do you want to tell me, John? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. How you doing? Great show.
Talk to me about the strike, John.
Right, I fully support the strike.
Okay.
There's what I really disagree with is people saying that it's just train drivers. It's not just the train drivers. It's the cleaners, it's the kiosk workers, and it's all those that's going to have all their jobs cut, plus their pensions cut back, while their management and the shareholders are raking in the cash and everyone else has to pay for it.
Okay. I'm going to have to leave you there, John, because I'm delighted to say we can move to the Prime Minister. So, John, please stay on the line. I'll try and come back to you if I can, but we have now the benefit of Boris Johnson joining me. I understand from a farm in Cornwall. Welcome. Prime Minister, what have you been doing on the farm this morning? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. I've been looking at the most incredible production of courgettes, of broccoli here in Cornwall, one of the few places in the world where they can produce these vegetables literally all the year round. Right. And what we're looking at is a supporting UK farmers, supporting British agriculture, because we've got an opportunity now to eat much more of domestic produce and to improve our food security. Well, and that's what we're trying to do.
And this is your landmark plan, but it's already been described as not a strategy. It doesn't set out a clear vision as to why we have the problems we have. You've dodged the idea of a salt and sugar tax, and also you've done nothing to try and bring about a reduction in consumption of meat. Those are the words of your own food czar, Henry Dimbleby, or words close to. So it's a failure, isn't it, Prime Minister?
I'm very grateful to Henry for all the work he's done. This is about helping to support UK food and farming at a particularly important time. Everybody knows we've got a shortage of grain around the world. We've got real pressures on food prices. We grow fantastic. What we want to do is support farmers to innovate. We're putting another £220 million into innovation so that we have more security and stability in our own supplies. I just looked at a machine that's only just been invented that can plant 150,000 cabbages in a day, and that is the type of progress that you need if you're going to bring costs down for consumers. That's what we're trying to do, and also making sure that we don't waste a lot of time and money importing stuff when we can grow it beautifully here in the UK.
All right. I know I only have you for a couple of minutes. If I could move you to other matters, Prime Minister. We have tomorrow the flight due to take people to Rwanda. Initially, it was going to be 130. Now it could possibly be fewer than 10. Would one flight justify this policy? Just one person being removed?
I think it's very important that the criminal gangs who are putting people's lives at risk in the Channel understand that their business model is going to be broken and is being broken by this government. They're selling people a false hope. They're luring them into something that is extremely risky and criminal. And it's very, very important.
But you're failing to deport them, Prime Minister. You and your colleague Priti Patel are failing to deport them. They're all having appeals, and these appeals are going to be heard, and there could be fewer than 10 on the plane.
We've always said that we knew that this policy would attract the attacks from those who want to have a completely open doors approach to immigration, who want people to be able to come across the Channel without let or hindrance. And there are very, very active lawyers, as you know, in this field. And I have the utmost respect for the legal profession, but it's also important that we stop criminal gangs. And that is the economic and migration partnership that we have with Rwanda is a way of doing. It's a way of saying to people, look, these people are selling you a false hope. They're telling you that you can come. I say, well, look, if you break the law, then you could go to.
You say you have respect, Prime Minister, for the legal profession. Do you have, Prime Minister? You say you have respect, sir, for the legal profession. Prince Charles says the plan is appalling. The Archbishop of Canterbury says it is against the judgment of God. How come you know better than the Prince Charles and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Prime Minister?
I think that most people can see that the criminal gangs who are not only risking at sea in the bringing people illegally, they need to be stopped. That model needs to be frustrated. But people can come to this country by safe and legal routes. And so I'm a beneficiary. My own family came to the UK. Lots of us in the UK a long time ago or recently. Families have got...
So just to clarify, Prince Charles is wrong, Prime Minister.
Let me put it this way, Nick. What I don't think that we should support is continued activity by criminal gangs.
No, I hear that, PM. But the Prince Charles is wrong.
Boats, very frail and very dangerous boats are risking their lives, but also breaking the law. And what it does, it undermines everybody who's coming here legally. And it undermines people who support immigration, who want people to come here legally and to be integrated properly. Right. That is important. I'm here on this farm, for instance. They are supported by a workforce that comes from all over the world, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, you name it. But they come here legally. They do it properly. They're not controlled by criminal gangs, and that is what we want to see.
All right. Last question. We're going to hear new details as regards the Northern Ireland Protocol later today, Prime Minister. But the Financial Times is reporting that an internal note circulating among some of your rebellious colleagues in the Conservative Party says what we'll hear today, quotes, breaks international law and no shopping around for rent-a-quote lawyers can hide that, and it's also being opposed by the CBI. This is dead in the water before it even takes off, isn't it, Prime Minister?
No, absolutely not. I like your metaphor. How can something be dead in the water before it takes off?
Because it's holed below the waterline, Mr. Johnson.
It's a seaplane, this thing. It is going to take off from the water. Because it's the right thing. It's the right way forward. What we have to respect, and this is the crucial thing, is the balance and the symmetry of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And we have to understand there are two traditions in Northern Ireland, broadly two ways of looking at the border issues. And one community at the moment feels very, very estranged from the way things are operating and very alienated. And we've just got to fix that. And it is relatively simple to do it. It's a bureaucratic change that needs to be made. Frankly, it's a relatively trivial set of adjustments in the grand scheme.
Your colleagues say it breaks international law.
Well, I disagree with that, and I tell you why. Because I think our higher and prior legal commitment as a country is to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and to the balance and stability of that agreement. And that means respecting very important. We can do that. That's all we're trying to do.
And lastly, the CBI says it could lead to trade wars.
I think that would be a gross overreaction. All we're trying to do is simplify things to remove the barriers to trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. How perverse, how preposterous at this time when we want to see greater facilities around the world to be introducing a trade, further restrictions on trade, when all we're trying to do is have some bureaucratic simplifications between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
All right, give me one more as we've battled with it. We haven't heard everything you've said, Prime Minister. Just one final question. I understand that we are soon going to hear about tax cuts. There will be a joint appearance between you and your colleague Rishi Sunak. This becomes, as your close former economist friend at the City Hall, Gerard Lyons, says, we need those tax cuts, as well as corporation taxes being cut. I'm sure you're a huge fan of Gerard Lyons and his work. Is he right, and when are we going to hear more, Prime Minister?
Yeah, he is. Can you hear me, by the way? Sorry, did you say you couldn't hear me?
I couldn't hear a little bit of you on Rwanda, but that's possibly a benefit. So do go on, continue.
Let me repeat it on Rwanda. What we need to do is stop the criminal gangs from...
No, I heard that, but is Prince Charles wrong when he says it's appalling? How come you know better than he?
I've answered that in the sense that I do think that it's the job of government to stop people breaking the law and to support people who are doing the right thing. That's what we're doing. And
now, what about the great lions of England, Gerard Lyons?
Gerard Lyons, quickly, where we are with that is we want to make sure that we do everything we can to reduce the burden of taxation. Actually, Jerry is going to get his wishes fulfilled as early as next month, when everybody who pays national insurance contributions will get a tax cut on average of £330. So that's just for starters, on top of the biggest cut in fuel duty ever, a £150 cut in council tax for most people in the country. So we're bearing down already on tax.
Jerry, as you referred to him, Jerry says you've listened too much to the Treasury, Prime Minister. He wants income tax cuts, corporation tax cuts, and then some word of that from you.
Well, he will understand that we're bringing in tax cuts as fast as we can, but what we've also got to do is look after people in a tough time. And so the prior job at the thing we're doing at the moment is looking after people who are facing increases in the cost of living, Nick, and that's why we're putting £1,200 for 8 million of the most vulnerable households in the country. We're giving £1,200 to 8 million of the most vulnerable households, £400 to everybody in the country to help with the costs of fuel and energy, another £300 for pensioners. And yes, of course, I understand that we need to bear down on taxation, and we certainly will. From the inflationary spike that we've got to get through right now, looking after people as we go through that, and that is what we are going to do. But the way forward, this I completely agree, Jerry, is to have supplies.
Okay, I'm grateful. Unfortunately, we've done, but I did hear what you said about Mr. Lyons. I'm grateful for you making the call from the farm down in Cornwall. I think that's why we battled a little bit with the quality of the line. If you can still hear me, Boris Johnson, thank you for phoning in and giving us that interview on a number of matters, not least, of course, which is what you're seeking to promote, which is this new food sustainability plan, which, as I pointed out right at the top, of course, has been opposed by his own food czar. But the government saying it is a strategy, it is the way forward. It's a landmark national plan to combat food poverty and indeed to help